Mark chapter 8. In those days, when there was again a large crowd gathered before him, and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and told them, "I feel compassion for the crowd. They have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing left to eat. If I send them away to their homes hungry, they will faint from exhaustion on the road, because some of them have come a long way." His disciples replied to him, "Where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this isolated place to feed these people?" He asked them, "How many loaves of bread do you have?" They said, 7. He directed the people to sit down on the ground, and taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks and broke them, and repeatedly gave them to his disciples to set before them. And they served the crowd. They had a few small fish, and when Jesus had blessed them and given thanks, he ordered these fish to be set before them as well. And the people ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 7 large baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 men were there, besides women and children. And he sent them away. Then immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmatia. The Pharisees came out and began to argue contentiously and debate with him, demanding from him a sign from heaven to test him because of their own belief. He groaned and sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation demand a sign? I assure you, and most solemnly say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." Leaving them, he again boarded the boat and left for the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. Jesus repeatedly ordered them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began discussing with one another, saying, "Is it because we have no bread that he said this?" Jesus, aware of this discussion, said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Though you have eyes, you do not see. And though you have ears, you do not hear and listen to what I've said. And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? They answered, 12. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they answered, 7. And he was saying to them, "Do you still not understand?" And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man to Jesus and begged him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he led him out of the village. After spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking around." Then Jesus again laid his hands on his eyes, and the man stared intently, and his sight was completely restored, and he began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." Then Jesus and his disciples went out to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, but others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter replied, "You, in contrast to the others, are the Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed." Then Jesus strictly warned them not to tell anyone about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must of necessity suffer many things, and be rejected as the Messiah by the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and must be put to death, and after 3 days rise from death to life." He was stating the matter plainly, not holding anything back. Then Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him. But turning around with his back to Peter and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for your mind is not set on God's will or his values and purpose, but on what pleases man." Jesus called the crowd together with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wishes to follow me as my disciple, he must deny himself, set aside selfish interests, and take up his cross, expressing a willingness to endure whatever may come, and follow me, believing in me, conforming to my example in living, and if need be, suffering or perhaps dying because of faith in me. For whoever wishes to save his life in this world will eventually lose it through death. But whoever loses his life in this world for my sake and the gospel's will save it from the consequence of sin and separation from God. For what does it benefit a man to gain the whole world with all its pleasures and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul and eternal life in God's kingdom? For whoever is ashamed here and now of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels."